Hello everyone. Today I would like to talk about such a worn-out topic as the Dyatlov Pass, or rather, the deaths of 9 tourists under the leadership of Igor Dyatlov. I recommend that you watch this video to the end, and you will find out the most plausible version, which practically no one voiced, despite the fact that this version is maximally matched with the events that have taken place. There are several versions of the group's death, and here are some of them. Deliberate murder of the entire group by local prisoners, of whom there were quite a few in those places since there were camps. Another version blamed the local residents of Muncie themselves, since the place of death of the Dyatlov group is considered sacred for Muncie, which means there is no place for strangers there. But given the positive reviews about Muncie, I do not believe that the people are friendly, could kill as they described us, good guys because of any prejudice. A version related to the then military developments of the Soviet Union was also considered, and the guys were at the wrong time and in the wrong place. But this version, as for me, is not worth attention, since the group's route was coordinated at the level of the City Commission of the Sverdlovsk Committee for Physical Culture, which means they would not have let the group go on a campaign if any military maneuvers had been carried out by the time they arrived in that area. There are other versions, and there are a lot of them. You can find out about them on the internet or by following the links in the description below, and I'll probably stop there. I will only add that the official version sounds like this. A group of 9 tourists led by Igor Dyatlov, who was skiing in the northern Urals, completely died. The only surviving participant in the trip, Yuri Yudin, left the route due to illness on January 28. According to the results of the official investigation, the incident was recognized as an accident caused by natural force. For those who first hear about this story, I will briefly tell you. On January 23, 1959, a group of tourists consisting of 10 people, Igor Dyatlov, Yuri Doroshenko, Lyudmila Dubanina, Grigory Krivonishenko, Alexander Kolevatov, Zenaida Kolmogorova, Rustem Slobodin, Nikolai Thibaut Brignol, Semyon Zolotarev, Yuri Yudin, goes on a hike for 16 to 18 days, dedicated to the 21st Congress of the CPSU. The route was planned to go on skis, and it ran through the northern region of the Sverdlovsk region, and the plan also included the conquest of 2 mountains of the northern Urals, Otorten and Oika Chakar. The complexity of this trip was rated as the 3rd category, that is, the highest for those times. Nevertheless, this adventure will ultimately be the last for the guys. In other words, the Dyatlov group died a terrible death. The only survivor of this group was Yuri Yudin. According to official information, he dropped out of the group on January 28 due to severe pain in his leg. Despite the closed case with the decision of the death version, this story remains a mystery to this day, since the majority does not believe in the official version. Well, I will not delay, but let's proceed to the moment, which, in my opinion, is considered the key and most important one. On January 23, 1959, Dyatlov's group of 10 people leaves by train from Sverdlovsk to Serov, where they arrive on the morning of January 24. In the evening of the same day, a group of Dyatlovites again leaves Serov by train, and by midnight they arrive in Yevdel. It is on this midnight route, in my opinion, that there is a fatal mistake that ended in a terrible ending. Perhaps you will say that this is just another stupidity, but do not rush to a conclusion, because further you will learn what many try not to mention or do not notice. We learn about what exactly happened on the train from Dubanina Diary. I quote, "On the train, songs were shouted at the top of their lungs, accompanied by a mandolin, and, I mean the group of Dyatlovtsi was shouting. Then a young alcoholic suddenly stuck to the guys and accused them of stealing a bottle of vodka. He demanded her return and promised to kick her in the teeth. In the end, without proving and receiving nothing, he gone away. Yurka came, sang a little with us and gone." Let's look at this point in more detail. Dubanina in his diary briefly mentions some conflict with a young alcoholic from the train, who accused Dyatlov's group of stealing a bottle of vodka and promised to kick in the teeth for what he had done. But then Dubanina writes that the offender eventually gone. But I believe that in this moment everything was not quite as described, and it is from here that the point of no return begins for the Dyatlov group. Why do I think so? Well, if only because the official and other types of versions do not fit in my logic with the found mutilated bodies of some members of the group. It was this reason that made me continue searching for an answer to the question, why did this happen? Here you don't even need a higher education to understand that a natural disaster cannot tear out your eyeballs and tongue, but leave the skin of your face intact. In addition, I had a chance to watch the video story of Vitaly Kuprienko, a link to the video in the description, in which he, albeit not professionally, but still plausibly expounds his story of the death of the Dyatlov group. And this story is the most comparable with the available facts, unlike most other versions and judgments. Unfortunately, I did not find the source from which Vitaly Kuprienko obtained such detailed information, which I will discuss below. But I want to emphasize, I looked through quite a few versions, but they all do not add up so logically as the story of Vitaly Kuprienko. Let's go back to Dubinina's diary. When the Dyatlovites were on the train already on the Saro-Vyevdel route, from Dubinina's diary we know that they shouted songs with a mandolin and even just like that. Agree. What a sober person will behave this way on public transport? The probability is very small. In my opinion, there are two options. Either the guys behaved so shamelessly, to put it mildly, considering themselves significant, or they were already tipsy. In any case, according to Vitaly Kuprienko, the guys dared to take a bottle of alcohol from a sleeping young guy, just the one that Dubinina further mentions in his diary. When the young guy woke up, he began to demand from the Dyatlovites to return a bottle of vodka to him. Dubinina also mentions this moment in her diary. In such a situation, the Dyatlovites were afraid to confess to theft. The Roofingfelds deliberately decided not to admit what they had done, but as a result of this conflict, by agreement with the guide in the presence of confirmation that the guys are going on a significant campaign to the glory of the 21st Congress of the CPSU, they transfer the young poor fellow into the hands of the police, accusing him in hooliganism and lies. I must emphasize that in this whole unpleasant story, as it later turns out from the story of Vitaly Kuprienko, Lyudmila Dubinina takes a big part, who accused and insulted the young man throughout the conflict. From the examination of the body of the deceased, it is known that Dubinina had no eyeballs, her tongue was torn out and her chest was broken. These facts are very important, remember them. Let's go back to the conflict on the train. The guy at the very first railway station is detained by the police and put into a cold cell for 2 days. But as Vitaly Kuprienko says, this guy was under the auspices of the then head of the 41st section, which was controlled by a thief-in-law named Grigory Ryaznev, and this is the section where Dyatlov's group was heading. It would seem that this is the end of the conflict, but this, based on the story, was the beginning of a terrible story. When a group of Dyatlovites arrived late in the evening on January 25 at 41 polling stations, the next day local residents, consisting of criminals, former prisoners, amnestied, anti-Soviet, and others, recognize one of the members of the group among the Dyatlovites, the Punisher of the Smersh detachment, represented by Semyon Zolotaryov, who were personally affected by his actions. But, we know that this is the only person, who is much older than all the other guys, and he inexplicably joined the group. After spending 2 days at 41st Precinct, on January 27th, a group of Dyatlovites is going on a hike according to their plan. A couple of hours before their departure, the same young guy who was arrested for 2 days for alleged hooliganism on the train, as Dubinina wrote, arrives at the 41st Precinct. Now we learn that his name was Ivan. On the same day, Ryaznev, after a conversation with a young detained guy Ivan, gathers a gathering on the topic of rudeness on the train of a group of Dyatlovites in relation to the detained guy Ivan, and a decision is made to punish the instigators, since there are rumors that lawlessness in the criminal world is punishable by lawlessness. A small remark: a young guy Ivan was a former prisoner, and therefore was under the auspices of Ryaznev, and Ryaznev, as mentioned earlier, was also the chiefs of the first forest area of the power timber processing plant in that area. From the story of Kuprienko, we learn that Ivan was returning by train from Sarov from his woman, where he ran into a group of Dyatlova, who later turned Ivan over to the police. By a terrible coincidence of circumstances on the train, as well as taking into account the fact of the presence of Zolotaryov, who is related to the Smersh detachments, the meeting decided to send 3 people to follow the group of Dyatlovats and eliminate everyone. According to Vitaly Kuprienko, the 3 punishers included Ivan, who suffered on the train from the unbounded trick of the Dyatlov group. After all, he had to give an answer according to the laws of the criminal world, otherwise he would have remained offended. The second person, who served a long term as a result of the activities of the Smersh detachment, carried an answer to Zolotaryov. And the third was a prisoner who served time with experience of bloody and cruel showdowns, who, from the story, committed a brutal murder in relation to Dubinina and Zolotaryov. On the night of January 28th, a group of Datlova stops and spends the night in a hut in an abandoned village called Second Severny, where they were brought by a cabman and a former prisoner named Stanislav Valushkevicius by order of Ryaznev. On the same day, Yuri Yudin leaves the Dyatlov group, under the pretext that his leg hurts for the second day and, in order not to delay the group on the hike, is forced to interrupt his participation. I want to remind you that Yuri Yudin is the only survivor of the entire Dyatlov group. And something tells me that this is not an accident. From the story of Kupranko, we also learn the following. Yuri Yudin condemned the act of his friends in relation to the young guy on the train, who was later handed over to the police. I must note, as it seems to me, Dubinina indirectly points to this in her diary, I quote, "Yurka came, sang a little with us and gone." Taking into account the story of Kupranko, we see that in the entry to the history on the train, nothing much is clarified, and this makes us believe that Dubinina presented the story in an insignificant plot. It follows that she could also distort the condemning conversation of Yuri Yudin on the train into the plane of singing songs, and after the guys ridiculed Yudin's condemnations, he got away from them. Vitaly Kupranko also mentions in his story that Yuri Yudin was more of a pro-Western person at heart and he sympathized with the prisoners in 41 precincts. Allegedly, Yuri spent most of the 2 days spent from January 25th to 27 with the locals, talking on all possible topics, thereby aroused sympathy, which ultimately saved his life from death. Now we will continue the events. From the members' diaries, we know that on January 28th in the morning, Yuri Yudin, Nikolai Thibault Brignol and Yuri Doroshenko went to extract a couple of cores of minerals for the institute. By lunchtime, possessing samples and saying goodbye to friends, Yuri Yudin returns with a cabman Stanislav Valushkevicius back to 41 precincts, and a group of Datlova, already consisting of 9 people, continued their journey to the top of Otertin. I will not describe the subsequent days of the Dyatlov group's march. You can find out in more detail from the links in the description, and I will move on to their last fateful night. On February 1st, the group set out with a delay, walked only 2 kilometers and pitched a tent at that very fateful place. After twilight came and all 9 members of the group settled in the tent, the very 3 punishers who were carrying their so-called response approached them. One of the 3 punishers fires a shot along the surface of the tent, above the vault itself, after which an obscene hail sounds with the words, "The answer came to you for your lawlessness, come out." Out of fright, there was a moment of silence in the tent, then one of the punishers cuts through the entrance of the tent with a knife, with screaming, "I count to 3, I shoot at the tent." At that moment, a group of Datlova with horror began to jump out of the tent, who were in what? This moment can explain why there is a cut in the tent from the inside, and all because one of the guys made a cut with a knife, in order to get out. It also follows from the story, that the punishers made sure that the guys did not have both pairs of shoes and outerwear on them. They also gave the Dyatlovites an opportunity to run, realizing that they would not run far away in the cold without shoes and outer clothing. Further from the story, it follows that the guys in full force got to the cedar, where there was an argument in half with a curse, accusing each other of the mistakes made earlier, for which they are punished. In the meantime, they tried to make a fire. As time went on, the guys were freezing from the cold, becoming inactive. For some reason, Dubinina and Zolotaryov separate from the general group, where, in their own footsteps, after a while, both are overtaken by a terrible death from the hands of a punisher. I will not describe in detail, but I will indicate only the main points. Both Dubinina and Zolotaryov have no eyes, a broken chest and, in addition, Dubinina's tongue was torn out. As for me, pulling out the tongue is an obvious sign of retribution for slandering young Ivan, who, in particular, through her fault, was detained by the police for 2 days. Zolotaryov himself died such a terrible death, as punishment for his actions in the Smersh detachment. These 2 participants in the campaign were overtaken by the most cruel reprisals, and the story of Vitaly Kupranko explains this. Nikolai Thibault Brignol and Rustam Slobodin were hit on the head with a log. Those who remained were killed or finished off, since the winter frost did part of the work. At this, we can say the whole story ends, as well as summing up the reasons for what happened. Perhaps at first glance it will seem stupid, but as people say, the devil is in the details. Frankly, from the moment when I learned about the history of the mysterious death of the Dyatlov group, and this was somewhere in the 2000s, the thought never left me, that everything is not as they are trying to present to us through official channels. And the first thing that should make you doubt it is that for a long time this case was classified as a secret. Agree. If really the cause of death of the Dyatlov group was a natural element, no one would have kept it secret for many years. At the very least, they would have learned a lesson and changed the methods of hiking. But since the case was classified for many years, it is obvious that this was due to good reasons why they did not want to inform the public. I would also like to add that on the channel Old School, the author talks about inconsistencies in the presence of the discovered things of the Dyatlov group, in particular felt boots. According to the list, 3 pairs of felt boots were missing, and this may indicate that 3 punishers took them for themselves. Watch this video, and you will learn some pretty interesting facts. Link in the description. In conclusion, I will show you a short video for a general understanding of why the mountain on which the Dyatlovites died is actually called the Mountain of the Dead. And this has nothing to do with the fact that 9 people died there earlier, but refers to the next riddle of our common history. Draw your own conclusions. Why is the mountain so called? He himself then answers the inhabitants of Mansi. Thank you for watching this video. Write your comments, and if you liked it, like it and subscribe to our channel.
Перевал Дятлова, понятно. Вообще гора же по-другому называется.
Холод-Чахл, гора мертвецов.
А почему такое суровое название, гора мертвецов?
Это с нашими сказками связано, со всемирным потопом.
Это с нашими сказками связано со всемирным потопом.